live. I think so. Yes, I am. I am reading out of Lord of the Horizon, a book by Joan Marshall Grant. It is a far memory book, so it is her life as Ra-Ab in ancient Egypt. It plays long before the flood, if I remember rightly. And we are now here in chapter 12. Ra-Ab is grown up. He is the nomarch of there's a nomarch called Oryx, and he is the head of that, the nomarch of that. We are here talking about Exiles village, because the last chapter was about giving sanctuary. It's chapter 12. Before the end of another year, I saw that I had not been too ambitious in planning the Exiles village on such a comparatively large scale, for it became necessary to build further accommodation for those who came to the Oryx for sanctuary. Until I had given judgment on the new arrivals, they were lodged in the house of petitioners. In a few cases I confirmed the sentence of them nomarch, and, after being provided with food sufficient for 3 days, they were conducted to the boundary of the Oryx. There were others whom I judged to be fit to mix freely with our people, and they were given work to do, or else began some training which would enable them to be of use to the community. It was only those in whom I hoped to effect a cure, but who, in their present state, would be uncongenial companions, that I sent to the Exiles village, where they would remain segregated from the rest of my people for as long as I deemed necessary. At each end of the village there was a large house where lived the men and the women who had come to the Oryx alone, and in between was a row of smaller houses, in each of which lived a family. Within the boundary of the village were fields where they could grow their own produce, and which provided grazing for the herds. I had given them in order to make them so far as possible self-supporting. A healer priest and a priest of Anubis were in attendance on them, and in addition there were also watchers to give them instructions in craftsmanship. 4 temple pupils, 2 men and 2 women, saw that our instructions were carried out. It was seldom necessary to employ force, but as people sometimes require to be taught to accept more subtle authority, 12 soldiers under a leader of 100 were also available. Everything had been done to make the surroundings as pleasant as possible. The houses had been color-washed in blue, pink and yellow. Some of them had simple frescoes in the main room, and each had a small garden planted with flowers and a shade tree. The single street was lined with sycamores, and a large swimming pool had been built near the canal. The fields had been ploughed and sown before the first exiles arrived, so that they should not be disheartened by the difficulties of breaking new ground, and as the number of inhabitants increased, so were additions made to their fields and herds. Acting on my father's suggestion that the experience we gained there might be of value in the future, a record of each exile was kept, this being the sole duty of 3 scribes. Every 7th day these records were brought to me, the scribe adding such details as the priest in charge of the case thought necessary for my information. Twice each month I went in person to the village. The first time that Kias heard the monotonous drone of the scribe's voice coming from the room of the seals, she told me that for a moment she feared I had become as preoccupied with the past as was our father. I laughed and told her that, had she listened more closely, she would have found that the subject to which I was attending belonged to our most immediate present. This is what she would have heard. A woman, aged 23, from the nome of the tortoise, exiled for killing her newborn child. She was brought here by her sister, who left her in our care and returned to her own nome. The woman at first refused to eat unless someone fed her. She had to be constantly watched and tried to mutilate herself. She tore her nails and her hair. For the first 10 days she refused to speak except to answer yes or no to the temple counselor when he questioned her. In her sleep she repeated over and over again, "Blood will wipe out blood. I have killed and I must be killed. I cannot wipe out my own sin. I must make someone hate me enough to murder me. Hate me, hate me, hate me." Away from earth, she told the priest of Anubis that the child she had killed was not her husband's son, but the son of a foreigner, a small merchant who had been trading in the tortoise. She said that immediately the child was born, she recognized that it was an Asiatic, and she killed it before the fact became obvious to everyone. She said she hated the baby because it was trying to take her husband away from her. She thought that people would believe the child died naturally, but the marks of her hands could be seen on its throat, and under questioning, she admitted her crime. She was condemned only to exile because she pleaded that the foreigner had forced her submission. The foreigner has now returned to his own country, but she is terrified that one day he will return and be able to prove that she lay with him in exchange for a bracelet which she had coveted. The temple counselor, having heard these facts from the priest of Anubis, spoke to her while she was awake. She no longer refused to talk, but claimed vehemently that she had been raped, and that in killing the child she had only been defending herself against its hated father. When at last she was convinced that it was useless to lie, she admitted that what the priest of Anubis had said was true. It is very easy to see the motives of her wish to die. She hates her body because she considers that through vanity it tempted her to take the bracelet. In reality, she hates it because it tempted her to take the foreigner. Her marriage was arranged by her family. She had no love for her husband. On her condemnation to exile, the marriage at the husband's wish was declared at an end. She is to be taught that to find expiation she must cherish a child of foreign blood, but that before she is ready to do this she must learn to honor her own body. She already shows considerable improvement. She no longer tries to mutilate herself, takes food when it is given to her, and is making an effort to keep herself clean. She has been given an orphan lamb to look after. It sleeps in her room, and she gives most scrupulous attention to all its needs. It is expected that within 3 months she will be ready to leave the village, and arrangements will be made for her to look after an orphan of foreign blood. The scribe unfolded another papyrus and began. Husband and wife, aged 30 and 35, exiled from the nome of the Ibex. The man killed another in a brawl, and the woman came with him voluntarily, not because she loved him, but because she had no kinsman, and was so unpopular that no one else would give her shelter. They have 3 children, the eldest 9 and the youngest 4, whom they nagged and bullied, though were not seen to inflict on them any physical damage. As soon as it was recognized that there was no real affection between parents and children, the children were sent to the house of the orphans. The parents were indignant and claimed that this was a violation of their rights. They were told that in the Oryx parents had no right over their children, save in virtue of the link of affection between them. As this did not exist in their case, they were judged to be unworthy of authority over anyone. They refused to collaborate in any communal activity, nor would they cook their own food or attend to their house or garden. It was explained to them that if they wished to stay in the Oryx, they must learn to abide by its laws, by our laws. They claimed that it was their right to have their children work for them, and had they not been taken away, the house would have been properly looked after, adding that it was the privilege of older people to make use of the young. By decree of Ra-Ab Hotep, nomarch, they are to live as children for 3 months, the place of their parents being taken by 2 of his soldiers. 1 month is now past. They wear clothes suitable to extreme use. She has a kilt which reaches from her waist to halfway down her thighs, and a necklace of 2 beads on a cord. He, a breeched clout. They are made to get up before dawn and do all the work of the house. Even when they are working as fast as they can, the soldiers nag them, and if they are not immediately obedient, they are whipped. Old wheels were discovered on the bodies of their children. When trying to rest, they are frequently awakened and told to do some meaningless task, for it was also found that their children were not allowed to play without being frequently interrupted. They never know when they may expect their food, nor did their children. Sometimes they are forced to eat that which is particularly distasteful to them. The woman dislikes garlic, but she was never tolerant of the preferences of her children. So she is given garlic at every meal, a clove of it even being rubbed round her bowl of millet porridge. He has been made to help clear a new water channel. At night he is washed by the soldiers, and they scrub him so hard that the skin is sore, and when he protests he is told not to be naughty. Sometimes they try to run away. Then they are brought back, shut in their room, and go without food for a day and a night, for this was the treatment they accorded their children. Women aged 60 exiled from the nome of the sycamore because she refused to obey the laws of cleanliness. On being told that unless she submitted to being cleansed of lice, she would not be allowed to live in the oryx. She agreed under protest to her head being shaved and her clothes burned. She was provided with a wig and fresh clothes. She was shown how personal and household garbage should be buried, but she refused to do this and threw it into the street. It was repeatedly explained to her that filth is the breeding ground of pestilence, but she continued in her habits and made no effort to change them. She was told that if this occurred again, she would be given the work of cleaning out the ox stalls, and this she was put to do. But she still continued to throw refuse into the street, although it was noticed that she took a certain pride in her house, and her room was always swept clean. It was explained to her that no private possession has any value except it be held in trust for the community, and therefore it was as much her duty to maintain the street uncontaminated as her own house. This instruction having produced no results by decree of Ra-Ab Hotep, Nomarch, the occupants of the adjoining houses emptied their garbage on the floor of her room. She was told that each time she failed to comply with the laws necessary to health, this would be repeated. A marked improvement has since been observed in her habits. She was found to have some skill in pottery and has been provided with the necessary materials. And now that her behavior has become more attractive, she is finding that the neighbors are not so unfriendly as had been her previous experience. She has asked for some flower seeds for her garden and has put a pot of convolvulus on her window ledge. These signs are so encouraging that it is hoped she will not long have to remain in the village. Boy of 15, exiled from the nome of the reed for cruelty to animals. His action persisted in spite of repeated punishment. He was watched, but without his knowledge. On his second day in the village, he was caught burying a cat alive. He showed no shame and said defiantly, "You can beat me, but I won't mind. I'm used to being beaten, but they can never make me scream." He pulled off his tunic to display a back deeply wealed. He was told that he would not be beaten, but that he would remain in his room until judgment was given. He looked disappointed, and it was noticed that he did not eat the food given him that evening. To the temple councillor he boasted of the number of animals he had tortured, and of the pain which had been inflicted on him in return. But while asleep he was more frank with the priest of Anubis. It is probable that when awake he has no memory of the following incidents of his childhood. His mother died in giving birth to him, and when he was 3 years old his father accused him of having caused his mother's death. The child soon afterwards fell in the fire and burned himself, but the father, instead of showing sympathy, said, "It is well that you hurt yourself, for your mother died through the pain you caused her." and every day I suffer because I have no wife." A few days later the child grabbed a cat by the tail, not intending to hurt it, but to stop it running away. The cat scratched its hand deeply, and a neighbor, hearing him cry, ran in to comfort him. He thought to himself, "I'm guilty because I have pain. I have pain to my mother. I gave pain to my mother, therefore I must suffer, because I can be cleansed of my guilt. Through hurting an animal I suffered pain, but I also received the sympathy for which I long." On waking, the priest of Anubis knew that it would be useless to inflict on the boy the pain he had given to animals, for to do so would be to fulfill the object of his cruelty. The infliction of pain was a quest for pain, through which he might receive sympathy. The priest decided to take drastic steps, which have proved very effective. Next morning, in the boy's food was mixed a draught compounded of poppy drink and a violent purge. As soon as the gripping of the bowls commenced, the boy was told that he was afflicted by pestilence, and warned that unless he was both brave and obedient, he was likely to die. He was drowsy with the poppy fumes, and so became less influenced by the memory of the immediate past. In his food he was given another draught, which kept him intermittently in pain and made him sufficiently weak to prevent him from having any desire to exert his independence. Exactly as though he were really suffering from a pestilence, he was cared for by one of the temple pupils, a girl of 20, beautiful and compassionate. She held his hand to help him bear the pain and smoothed his forehead until he fell asleep. She washed and fed him as though he was a baby, and when he grew stronger she told him stories of the way of peace. He conceived a deep devotion for her, and asked that he might be allowed to serve her in however humble a capacity. She told him that one of her duties was to look after the geese, and that it would be a great help if he would do this for her. Her words caused him to remember his many cruelties. He wept bitterly and said he dared not do what she asked, for sometimes deliberately and sometimes almost against his will he was cruel to animals, and that if he attacked her geese it would be almost as bad as though he did her personal injury. She said to him, "You were so ill that you might have died. I asked the gods that you might be born again. They listened and you recovered. The cruelty which you once inflicted and the pain you suffered are as though they had never been. They are dead, but you are alive. Because of the link between us, you will never again forget the link between you and your younger brothers." He was filled with hope, but even so he did not entirely believe her. She brought him a kitten and left him alone together with her. When she returned, he was asleep with a kitten curled up beside him. He has asked to stay in the village so that he can work for the girl who brought peace to him. He is learning how to look after sick animals, and he is so gentle with them that he can drive out their fear. So that was the end of chapter 12. Chapter 13 is Return of Nekhet. It is Wednesday the 27th of